about, well, what is it that we see InnerSource Commons members talk a lot about? They will talk a lot about things like, are my InnerSource projects discoverable? Is there some way within the organization for people to see what is made InnerSource or not? You'll hear them talk a lot about this idea of getting the permission to make the code visible or not. Is it visible by default as a policy within my organization, or do I have to have justification around that? And then there'd be a lot of talk about trying to break down some of those organizational constraints that may hamper the idea of collaboration. And sometimes that's as simple as, just maybe middle management really not being aware of the potential for this and how budgets are allocated and how that might constrain whether collaboration is allowed to happen or not, whether you can pass code beyond organizational boundaries or not. So it's interesting. I think the principles at a high level are the same. The conversations can be very different in terms of enabling inner source versus enabling open source within an organization.
Right. And in my experience, I think the challenges, interestingly enough, can be very similar and maybe even possible to analyze more as a microcosm in the sense of who pays for the reviewers of other people's code
Mhm.
that you might contribute into this code base, and who's paying for maintaining that, because
Mhm.
similar to open source projects, the developers that have written this code and have made it visible to others inside of the company, again, they're on a product deadline, and so they need to get stuff done. And if there is a contribution that is needed, and that other organization doesn't want to fork, they would like it all to be a same common base, then there's expense being done by the original authors because they have to review and bring that code in. So I see the same type of dynamics. I mean, have you seen that as well? And are there any
Yeah.
silver bullets for getting that one fixed?
Wouldn't you wish there was a silver bullet, but no, silver budget as well.
A
Silver
silver,
budget that is a
that's
silver
what you
bullet.
need, is a silver.
That's it.
Exactly.
And to be fair, some people are, I suppose, experimenting with this idea of actually having a budget that's specifically for well-used inner source projects, and then they move into some sort of classification of core infrastructure that then gets some centralized budget support.
I think you should coin that phrase too. I think you
I
should
really
call
had
it the
silver
silver
budgeting.
budget and just get
That
that
it
one
solves
trademarked.
all the but I do think the idea, so yes, the same challenges absolutely occur. However, I will say sometimes that the conversation becomes, sometimes it's a little bit easier to justify the spend on maintenance of a particular project, for example, because the organization knows that they own that code, right? So it's maybe a different conversation. You're saying, I'm maintaining it for my millions of users out there in the ether, and you're like, look, and someone somewhere with a ROI spreadsheet is going, who now? Who's getting the benefit of this? Whereas certainly within the organizational boundaries, maybe that kind of ROI conversation can be a little easier, though it's still challenging, right? To prove reuse, to prove the value beyond from the creator's organization. Um, but there are organizations who are looking at that and measuring the value and being able to quantify the reuse, for example. So there are organizations that we would have that as members of InnerSource Commons who would discuss a lot about that, about trying to measure the value. And sometimes it's in the context of things like transfer pricing and things like that. So even in terms of regulatory reporting around inner source and software reuse within organizational boundaries, that becomes an issue. Again, transfer pricing doesn't become an issue with open source, interestingly, because that was exempt from that kind of discussion. So that's another area
Exactly.
where open source becomes easier. But the conversation around transfer pricing has sometimes forced organizations to quantify the value, which then lends itself to discussions around where budget should come from. So it's interesting that those dynamics are subtly different, but and sometimes extremely different. But they do. So same challenges, maybe different outcomes. And I think the patterns for how people manage that is something that certainly InnerSource Commons are very interested in gathering over time.